Why does Bath look like one building? Count with me. 30 front doors, 114 columns, one curve of golden stone, some 500 feet long. To the eye, a single palace. Except it isn't a palace. Stand on the lawn at evening, and you are looking at 30 separate houses, built by different builders for different buyers over 8 years. 30 private lives wearing one costume. This trick, the palace that is actually a street, is the secret of nearly every street Britain is proudest of. Mile after mile of houses dressed identically, and people paid measurably more for the privilege of matching. Nobody set out to design that. It precipitated out of a fire, 4 acts of parliament, a very clever lease, and one of the most elegant sales tricks in the history of building. In 1666, London is a medieval city built of timber. Jettied houses lean over the lanes, each upper story reaching closer to the neighbor opposite. A bakery catches fire on Pudding Lane, and the wind does the rest. 4 days later, 4/5 of the walled city is ash. The law's answer the next year reads less like legislation than a building manual. The Rebuilding Act of 1667 declares timber walls finished. Every new house must be made of brick or stone, and thick party walls between neighbors become mandatory. As this diagram shows, the city's houses were suddenly reduced to 4 explicit sorts, graded by the street they sit on. 2 stories on the bylanes, 3 on streets of note, 4 on the high and principal streets. For the first time, an English house is a regulated category. Its dimensions are fixed by law before the first brick is laid. Nicholas Barbin steps into the ash and understands exactly what a regulated house is. He builds standard plans, whole rows at a time, whole streets at a time. A uniform house is a calculable risk, which is exactly why the man who standardized the London house also founded its first fire insurance company. The law keeps going. In 1707, the carved wooden crowns every house wore at the eaves are banned because fire runs along them. In 1709, the exposed sash window frame is pushed away from the facade. Set it back 4 inches into the brick. Look at a Georgian street and you can read all of this. The flat face, the hidden roof, the deep window reveals. Nobody chose that look. It was subtracted into existence, one prohibition at a time over 40 years. Subtraction makes a street plain and safe. But plain is not yet beautiful, and it is certainly not yet expensive. For that, someone has to make plainness grand. Bath in the 1720s is filled with fashionable society pouring into a small town that has nowhere to put them. An architect named John Wood the Elder leases a field and designs Queen Square, but only the fronts. One composed, symmetrical Palladian elevation. He divides the ground behind that drawing into plots and sublets them to different builders. He gives them 2 years free of full rent to get the walls up and the roof on. Each builder may construct whatever house he pleases behind the wall, but to buy in, you build Wood's facade. The trick works so well it becomes a dynasty. By 1767, his son, John Wood the Younger, begins a single sweep of giant Ionic columns, writing a rusticated ground floor, the Royal Crescent, 30 houses forming one continuous Roman monument. One architect drew one front, 30 buyers filled in 30 different houses. The unified palace face is not how the houses were built, it is what was for sale. Walk around the back. From the lawn, Rome. From the service lane, a jumble. Different roof heights, different depths, stair towers elbowing each other. The period had an idiom for it, a Queen Anne front and a Mary Anne back. The building line, the front, is the entire product. Everything behind it is private, various, and nobody's business. Everything on it is regulated, composed, and priced. Developers had discovered something remarkable. Repetition is the cheapest way to build. Grandeur is the most expensive thing to buy. The palace front sells the first at the price of the second. Restraint was margin. And to be honest about where that margin came from, the fortunes that rented these houses and paid these premiums included money from Atlantic trade, built directly on enslaved labor. The Crescent's beauty is real, and so is that ledger. Looking at this antique map of 1700s London, you can see the immense scale of urban sprawl that demanded new rules. By the 1770s, the trick is national. And the Building Act of 1774 categorizes every new house in London into one of 4 explicit rates, based entirely on square footage. Wall thicknesses, materials, and the restraint of the front, fixed per rate. A speculative builder no longer designs a house, he picks a rate and repeats it. And the financial engine driving this is the lease. In Bedford Square, the estate lets each plot on a 99-year building lease at a ground rent of about £3 a year. The builder raises the house at his own risk and sells the lease. The buyer gets a first-rate address, and at the end of the term, the house and the land revert entirely to the estate. Around this time, the word terrace attaches itself to a row of houses. It is a product name, housing branded exactly the way a developer would brand it, and it ships. Dublin's Georgian squares, next Bristol's grand sweeping crescents, and Brighton's sunny stone seafront. Through the reigns of 4 Georges, one standardized format at 4 price points quietly becomes a British street. You could not design a legal instrument more perfectly shaped to produce beautiful fronts and indifferent backs, written into contract law. The landowner urbanizes his fields at almost no cost, and his great-grandchildren collect the entire street. So why does Bath look like one building? Because it is pretending to be one, and the pretense was profitable. The Georgian Terrace precipitated out of a fire that outlawed ornament element by element. It relied on a lease that made the front the only page of the contract worth designing, and a sales trick that disguised the cheapest way to build as the dearest thing to buy. The law made the street plain. The money made the plainness grand. 2 centuries later, we fell in love with the result and called it taste. The most admired streets in Britain are fire law and ground rent, beautifully typeset in stone. The constraint really did make them beautiful. 2 footnotes before you go. First, a street that shares its walls loses heat through them only once and puts 30 front doors on one small lawn's worth of city. Second, this logic appears next in Edinburgh's new town, an entire planned city of terraces, performing the palace front trick at the scale of a capital. That episode is coming soon. So, a question for the comments. Could you live behind a shared face? Does a street where every house must match read as generosity or as tyranny? Let us know.